My name is Emma Carter. I'm 33 years old, and 3 years ago my own family laughed so hard at my biggest decision that strangers turned around to stare. They still thought it was funny, right up until the day they queued outside my office, asking if I had any jobs going. Funny how success changes the sound of people's laughter. But if you think this story is about proving people wrong, it isn't. It's about discovering what people really think you're worth when they believe you failed. And trust me, I found that out the moment I bought the oldest, ugliest grocery shop in North Yorkshire. It happened on a damp Saturday morning in the market town of Richmond. The rain had soaked through my coat, and the faded for sale sign hanging outside the building looked as though it had given up years before I ever arrived. The windows were covered in dust. Half the roof needed replacing. The wooden floor sagged near the entrance. The refrigeration units hadn't worked in months. Most people walked past it without even slowing down. I stood there, smiling, because while everyone else saw an abandoned business, I saw the only opportunity I'd ever truly owned. The estate agent unlocked the door and gave me the sort of smile people reserve for hopeless optimists. "You still want to look inside?" he asked. "I've already warned you about the repairs." I know. The survey wasn't encouraging. I read it. The previous owner went bankrupt. So I heard. He studied me for a moment before shrugging. "Well, once you've seen it, you'll probably change your mind." I didn't. The place smelled of old timber, damp cardboard, and forgotten years. Empty shelves stretched across the shop floor. The checkout counter still held a cracked mug with dried tea stains inside. Someone had walked away from this place in such a hurry that it almost felt like they might come back tomorrow. The estate agent kept apologizing. "The wiring needs replacing." "I know. The roof leaks." "I know. The cold room is beyond saving." "I know. You'd honestly be better knocking it down." I looked around one more time. "No," I said quietly. "It deserves another chance." He looked at me as though I'd just adopted a sinking ship. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers, and by Sunday afternoon, my entire family knew. My older brother Oliver organized what Mum called a little celebration at my parents' house in Harrogate. It wasn't a celebration. It was an intervention disguised as Sunday lunch. Roast beef, Yorkshire puddings, 3 bottles of wine, 8 family members. 1 target. Me. Dad carved the meat while Mum filled everyone's glasses. Oliver waited until dessert before leaning back in his chair with the smug grin he'd perfected sometime around secondary school. "So," he announced loudly, "our Emma has officially bought herself a haunted supermarket." Everyone laughed. Even my aunt nearly choked on her trifle. "It's not a supermarket," I replied. "It's an independent grocery shop." "Not yet it isn't," Oliver smirked. "Right now it's just an expensive pile of rotten bricks." More laughter. His wife Natalie shook her head. "I drove past that place last year. I thought it had been condemned." "It practically has," Oliver replied. Across the table, my younger sister Chloe picked up her phone. "Tell me you took photos. Oh, please tell me you did. I want to see what 40,000 pounds of bad decisions looks like." I hadn't. I was too busy signing contracts. She laughed even harder. "You've actually done it." Mum reached across the table and squeezed my hand the way people comfort someone after bad news. "Sweetheart, we're only worried about you." Dad nodded. "You've always worked hard. You had a stable management job, a pension, paid holidays. Now you've thrown it away for that." I took a sip of water. "I didn't throw it away. I invested it." Oliver snorted. "In what? Rats?" The table erupted again. I noticed something then. Nobody had asked me why I'd bought it. Not one person. They'd all decided I was foolish before they'd heard a single reason. I smiled politely. "I've done the maths." Oliver nearly spilled his drink laughing. "Emma, you sell baked beans. You're not Warren Buffett." Another round of laughter. I let it pass. Because explaining dreams to people who've already decided they'll fail is like reading a map to someone determined to stay lost. Mum eventually cleared her throat. Well, if it all goes wrong, you can always move back home. The words sounded kind. They weren't. They were insurance. She'd already prepared for my failure. I simply nodded. Thank you. Then Dad asked the question everyone had really been waiting for. How much did you actually pay? The room went quiet. I told them. Oliver whistled. Natalie covered her mouth. Chloe actually burst into laughter. You paid that for that? Oliver leaned forward. I'll make you a deal. If that shop's still open in 12 months, I'll personally buy every tin of beans you've got. Everyone laughed again. I smiled. Deal. He held out his hand dramatically. I shook it. None of us realized then it would become the most expensive handshake of his life. The next morning, I collected the keys. There wasn't a ribbon. There wasn't champagne. There wasn't anyone congratulating me. Just one rusty key, one empty building, and every penny I'd spent over 12 years of saving. I unlocked the front door just after 7. Rain tapped gently against the windows. The silence inside felt enormous. For the first hour, I simply cleaned. Broken boxes. Old price labels. Dust thick enough to leave footprints. Around midday, I moved an old shelving unit that hadn't been touched in years. Something scraped across the wooden floor. I frowned. The shelf had been hiding a small trapdoor I'd never noticed during the viewing. It was fitted almost perfectly into the floorboards. No mention of it appeared on the survey. Curious, I pulled the iron ring. It creaked open slowly. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness beneath the shop. Cold air drifted upwards, carrying the smell of old paper and damp stone. The estate agent had never mentioned a cellar. Neither had the surveyor. I switched on my torch. Then I climbed down. What I found beneath that forgotten grocery shop wasn't treasure. It wasn't money. It wasn't hidden wine. It was something far more valuable. Something that explained why the previous owner had refused every offer for nearly 30 years. Until the week before he died. I stood at the bottom of the narrow staircase with my torch trembling ever so slightly in my hand. The cellar wasn't large. It was barely big enough to stand comfortably in. Stone walls. A low timber ceiling. Shelves covered with decades of dust. Dozens of wooden apple crates sat neatly stacked against one wall, as though someone had simply locked the door one evening and forgotten to come back. At first, I thought I'd discovered nothing more than an old storage room. Then, my torch landed on a thick leather-bound ledger, resting on a workbench. The cover had cracked with age. Stamped into the leather were 4 simple words: Harrison's Grocers since 1958. I brushed away the dust and opened it. It wasn't an account book. It was a diary. Every page had been written by the shop's original owner, Arthur Harrison. The first entry dated back more than 60 years. If people trust you enough to buy their bread from you, they'll trust you with everything else. I smiled. The next few pages weren't about profits. They weren't about suppliers. They were about people. Mrs. Wilson couldn't afford milk this week. Leave it on her doorstep. Mr. Collins lost his wife. Deliver groceries until he's back on his feet. Young Daniel starts university tomorrow. Put a chocolate bar in his bag. Every page described another act of kindness. Another neighbor helped. Another family remembered. I spent almost an hour sitting on the dusty floor reading. By the time I climbed back upstairs, I realized something that every business course I'd ever attended had failed to teach me. Arthur hadn't built a grocery shop. He'd built trust. And, somewhere along the way, people had forgotten. Reality arrived the following Monday. Builders, electricians, roofers, plumbers. Every single quote was higher than the last. My savings disappeared frighteningly fast. The roof alone cost more than my first car. By the end of the second week, I found myself sitting on an upturned paint tin eating a supermarket meal deal because I couldn't justify buying anything else. I looked around the empty shop. No shelves, no customers, no income, just invoices. For the first time, Oliver's laughter echoed inside my head. "You've bought yourself a pile of rotten bricks." I hated how convincing his voice sounded. The renovation took nearly 4 months. Most mornings started before 6. Most evenings ended well after dark. When I couldn't afford contractors, I painted walls myself. I sanded shelves myself. I assembled every display unit myself. I watched YouTube tutorials on repairing wooden counters because hiring a carpenter simply wasn't an option anymore. By Christmas, my hands were permanently covered in tiny cuts. My back ached. My bank account looked terrifying. But the shop finally looked alive again. Fresh cream walls, oak shelving, black chalkboards, warm lighting. A proper local grocery, not flashy, just welcoming. Opening day arrived with far less excitement than I'd imagined. I unlocked the doors at 8 o'clock. At 8:15, nobody. At 9, still nobody. By lunchtime, I'd sold 1 loaf of bread, a newspaper, and 2 bananas. Total sales, 8.65. I locked up that evening fighting back tears. Not because I'd failed, because I'd started wondering whether my family had been right all along. Business stayed painfully slow. Some days I served fewer than 10 customers. The supermarket on the retail park could undercut every price I offered. I couldn't compete. Not on cost. Not on convenience. Not on advertising. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, an elderly lady walked in carrying a walking stick. She looked around slowly before smiling. I used to come here with my mother. I recognized her name immediately. Mrs. Wilson. Arthur Harrison had written about her dozens of times. "You knew Arthur?" I asked. Her eyes lit up. "Knew him?" "He practically kept this town fed." She spent 20 minutes telling me stories. About Christmas hampers secretly left on doorsteps, children given free fruit after school. Families helped through difficult winters without anyone ever finding out. Before she left, she placed her hand gently on mine. "This building doesn't need another shop. It needs another Arthur." Those words stayed with me all night. The following morning, I made the biggest decision of my life. I stopped trying to compete with supermarkets. Instead, I started rebuilding a community. Every Thursday became local farmers' day. Fresh eggs from nearby farms, Yorkshire cheeses, homemade jams, fresh bread baked less than 5 miles away. Every Saturday morning, I served free tea and biscuits for pensioners. I created a notice board where local people could advertise lost pets, charity events, and small businesses. Parents stopped for coffee after the school run. Retired couples stayed talking for an hour. Children came in after school for homemade flapjacks. People weren't shopping anymore. They were gathering. Exactly as Arthur Harrison had intended. 6 months later, I no longer knew every customer by name. Because there were simply too many. Friday afternoons became so busy we had queues stretching onto the pavement. The local newspaper ran a story titled, "Old Grocery Shop Becomes the Heart of Richmond Again." I framed the article behind the till. Not because it praised me. Because it proved kindness could still be good business. Then, one Thursday morning, just as I was helping a little boy choose sweets with his pocket money, my phone rang. It was Oliver. I smiled. He hadn't called me once in nearly 7 months. Not once. I answered cheerfully. "Morning, Oliver." There was an unusually long silence before he finally spoke. "Emma, I was wondering if we could have a chat." For the first time in my life, my brother didn't sound like the successful one anymore. Oliver didn't speak immediately. For someone who'd always had an opinion, silence sounded strange on him. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been made redundant." I leaned against the stockroom door. "I'm sorry to hear that. The company's restructuring. They've closed our entire regional office." There was another pause. Then came the sentence I'd never imagined hearing. "I wondered if you might have anything going." I looked through the office window onto the shop floor. Every till was busy. Our bakery counter had almost sold out before noon. Mrs. Wilson was chatting with two young mums over coffee, while one of my Saturday staff helped an elderly gentleman carry shopping to his car. 3 years ago, Oliver had called this place a pile of rotten bricks. Now he was asking if it could pay his mortgage. "I've actually got interviews lined up," he said quickly. "I'm just exploring options." I almost smiled. People always soften desperation with better vocabulary. "I'll think about it," I replied. His relief was immediate. "Thanks, Em." When I hung up, I noticed Arthur Harrison's old ledger sitting on the shelf behind my desk. His first sentence drifted back into my mind. "People remember how you make them feel." I wondered if that applied to family. The next few months passed in a blur. The shop expanded into the empty unit next door. We opened a proper bakery, then a small cafe, then an online delivery service covering nearby villages. By our 3rd anniversary, we employed 23 people. 23. I still remembered standing alone with a mop in an empty building, wondering whether I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Now, Friday staff meetings barely fitted into the stockroom. The Richmond Gazette called us one of North Yorkshire's fastest-growing independent businesses. Customers traveled from York, Harrogate, and even Leeds just to visit us. But the newspaper article wasn't what surprised me. It was my family. Suddenly, everyone wanted to tell people they were related to me. Mum started bringing her friends into the cafe every Tuesday. "This is my daughter's place," she'd say proudly. Dad suddenly told neighbors he'd always known I'd make something of the shop. Even Chloe began posting photographs online with captions like, "Supporting local family businesses." I never corrected them. Success has a funny way of rewriting other people's memories. Then Christmas arrived. We hosted our biggest community food drive yet. Customers donated hundreds of hampers for struggling families. Local schools joined in. The church helped distribute everything. It became the largest charity event our little town had ever organized. That evening, I stood near the entrance watching volunteers load vans. Arthur Harrison would have been proud. That's when I noticed 3 familiar cars pulling into the car park. My family. All of them. Together, they weren't carrying donations. They were carrying envelopes. We gathered in the cafe after closing. Nobody touched their tea. Oliver spoke first. "I'll just come out with it." The mortgage company repossessed the house. I stayed quiet. Chloe stared at the table. The marketing agency let half the staff go. I'm one of them. Dad sighed heavily. My pension investments haven't done well. Mum folded her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then Oliver slid a CV across the table. "I know how this must look." I looked down. His Ursum had been professionally printed. The same brother who once laughed at my business had spent hours preparing an application to work in it. One by one, the others followed. Chloe, Natalie, even Mum. 4 envelopes. 4 job applications. The room felt strangely familiar. Then, I realized why. 3 years earlier, I'd been the one sitting alone while everyone else judged my decisions. Now the seats had changed. Oliver tried to smile. "You've done incredibly well." "I suppose we all got it wrong." "Just a bit," I replied. Nobody laughed. Mum finally reached across the table. "We're family. We help each other." The sentence landed differently now, because I remembered another family meal, another table, another version of those words. If it all goes wrong, you can always move back home. They'd prepared for my failure long before it happened. Now they expected my success to rescue theirs. I stood, and walked over to the wall behind the coffee machine. Arthur Harrison's old leather ledger sat inside a glass display case. Oliver frowned. "I've never understood why you keep that old thing." I smiled gently. "Because this business wasn't built on shelves. It was built on character." I opened the case carefully and placed the ledger on the table. "This book taught me something." I looked at each of them in turn. "It says that every person who works here earns trust before responsibility, not because they're family, because customers deserve people who care." Nobody interrupted. So here's my answer. 4 hopeful faces looked up at me. "None of you are getting a job." The silence was absolute. Then I continued before anyone could react. Today Oliver blinked. "What?" "I'm not hiring relatives because they're relatives. I'm hiring people who prove they belong here." I pushed every envelope back across the table. "If you genuinely want to work here, you'll apply exactly the same way everyone else did. You'll interview. You'll train. You'll start at the bottom. And you'll answer to managers who aren't related to you." Mum looked hurt. "You'd make your own mother interview?" I nodded. I interviewed. I cleaned toilets. I unloaded delivery lorries. I worked 16-hour days. So yes, my mother interviews too. Nobody spoke. Not because they were angry. Because, for the first time in our lives, nobody could argue it wasn't fair. As they quietly gathered their CVs, Oliver stopped beside me. "I'm sorry. No excuses. No jokes. Just 2 words." For the first time, I believed him. I smiled. "When interviews open next month, you're welcome to apply." He nodded once. Not as my older brother. Not as someone expecting special treatment. Just another applicant hoping for an opportunity. As they walked out into the cold December evening, I watched through the caf window. 3 years earlier they had laughed as I walked towards an empty grocery shop. Tonight, they walked away from a thriving business with something far more valuable than a promise of a job. They walked away understanding that success isn't inherited. It's earned. And although none of us knew it then, one member of my family would return a month later and completely change the ending of this story. The interviews opened on the first Monday of January. We received over 100 applications. Among them, 4 familiar names: Oliver, Chloe, Mum, and, to my surprise, Dad. None of them received special treatment. Sarah, my operations manager, handled every interview. She had no idea they were my family until after the shortlist had been completed. When she walked into my office carrying the final interview scores, she smiled. "You've got one exceptional candidate." I looked down. It wasn't Oliver. It wasn't Chloe. It wasn't Mum. It was Dad. He'd scored the highest for honesty. Apparently, when Sarah asked why he'd applied, he'd answered, "Because I spent too many years watching good people work while I stood comfortably behind them." I'd like to know what earning something feels like again. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me all day. Dad started the following Monday. Not in the office. Not behind the till. He asked to work in deliveries. Every morning at 6:30, before anyone else arrived, he'd load fresh vegetables into the van and drive around Richmond delivering groceries to elderly customers. The first week, Mrs. Wilson rang the shop. "I don't know who your new delivery gentleman is, but he carried my shopping into the kitchen, made me a cup of tea, and changed the battery in my smoke alarm before he left." I laughed. That sounded exactly like my dad. By the end of the month, customers were requesting him by name. Not because he was my father, because he cared. Arthur Harrison would have approved. Oliver didn't get the job. Not because he failed, because he withdrew his application. A week later, he knocked on my office door carrying 2 coffees. "I owe you something. You don't owe me anything. I do." He stared at the floor for a moment before continuing. "When you bought this place, I laughed because I was terrified. I frowned. Terrified of what? That you'd succeed." The honesty caught me completely off guard. My whole life I'd been the successful one, the one everyone admired, and then you risked everything while I played safe. If you'd failed, I would have been right. But when you succeeded, I had to admit I'd spent years mistaking comfort for ambition. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he smiled. I've started my own business. What sort? A mobile property maintenance company. I've got 1 van, 3 clients, and absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I laughed. Then you're probably doing it properly. He laughed too. For the first time in years, we sounded like brother and sister again. Mum never applied again. Instead, one rainy Thursday morning, she quietly walked into the cafe carrying a cardboard box. I found these. Inside were dozens of old photographs. Arthur Harrison standing outside the original shop, children eating free ice creams during a Village 50, Christmas hampers lined across the floor. Then there was one photograph I'd never seen before. Arthur standing beside a teenage girl. My mum. She couldn't have been more than 16. Arthur had his arm around her shoulder while she held a paper bag full of groceries. On the back he'd written, "Carol worked hard today. Refused to take payment. One day she'll understand that kindness doesn't create debt, it creates home." Mum stared at the handwriting for a long time. I'd forgotten this. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. No, she corrected herself. I think I chose to forget. Tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The sort that arrive years late. I'm sorry, Emma. No explanation. No justification. Just 4 words. I'd imagined that moment hundreds of times over the years. I'd imagined shouting. Walking away. Making her feel everything I'd felt. Instead, I simply reached across the table and held her hand. Because forgiveness isn't pretending something never happened. It's deciding that the hurt won't decide what happens next. Spring arrived with daffodils lining Richmond's Market Square. The oak bench outside the shop became everyone's favorite place to drink coffee. Children still came in after school for homemade flapjacks. Pensioners still argued over crossword clues every Tuesday morning. And every Thursday, Dad still made his deliveries. One afternoon, Mrs. Wilson smiled at me while paying for her groceries. You know, this place feels exactly like Arthur's again. I looked around. The bakery smelled of fresh bread. The cafe buzzed with conversation. Someone laughed near the fruit display. A little girl waved goodbye to Dad as he loaded another delivery into the van. For the first time, I realized something. I hadn't saved an old grocery shop. The old grocery shop had saved me. It had taught me that success isn't measured by how many people envy your life. It's measured by how many people feel welcome because of it. Last month, I unlocked the front door as usual at 8 o'clock. Before switching on the lights, I glanced at Arthur Harrison's old ledger resting safely inside its glass case. I still read the first page whenever life feels complicated. If people trust you enough to buy their bread from you, they'll trust you with everything else. He was right. They trusted me with birthdays, with celebrations, with grief, with stories, with their children, with their parents, with tiny pieces of their lives. And that's worth infinitely more than profit. Sometimes people ask whether I regret buying an abandoned grocery shop that everyone else thought was worthless. I always give them the same answer. No, the shop was never the investment, the people were. And every morning, when I turn the sign from closed to open, I remember the day my family laughed as I carried those rusty keys through the front door. They thought I was buying an old building. What I was really buying was the chance to build a life no one could ever laugh at again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Calm Family Secrets for more powerful revenge stories, unforgettable family dramas, and inspiring life lessons. Every story has a secret, and every secret has a lesson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.